My name is Artur, and I still remember the last time I saw my father alive, not because it was beautiful, because it was ordinary. That is what bothers me most now. There was no music in the room, no final speech, no moment where both of us suddenly became the men we should have been. He was sitting in an old chair near the window, thinner than I remembered, with a blanket over his knees. I stood in the doorway longer than I needed to, holding a bag of groceries I had brought him, pretending I was only there to help. I could have said something that day. I could have said, "I know you did the best you knew how," or even just, "I don't want us to end like this." But I didn't. I placed the groceries on the counter. I asked if he needed anything. He said no. I nodded. Then I left. 3 weeks later, he was gone. People think regret arrives with noise. Mine arrived in the quiet after the funeral, when everyone had gone home and I was alone with all the things I never said. My father was not an easy man. That is the simplest way to say it. He worked with his hands most of his life. Construction, repairs, delivery jobs, whatever kept money coming in. His palms were always cracked. His shoulders always looked tired. He smelled like dust, tobacco, and cold air. When I was a boy, I thought he was made of stone. He didn't hug much. He didn't explain himself. He believed food on the table was love, and anything more than that was softness. If I cried, he told me to wash my face. If I was afraid, he told me to stop making problems. If I wanted to talk, he usually found something to fix. That was the kind of house I grew up in. Not cruel every day, not dramatic, just hard, quiet, full of rules nobody had written down. My mother made the home warmer as much as she could. She would touch my shoulder when she passed by. She would lower her voice when he was in a mood. She taught me how to read his silence before he entered a room. Children learn that quickly. They learn footsteps. They learn the sound of a door closing. They learn when not to ask. For a long time, I believed I hated him. Hate felt simpler than hurt. As a young man, I promised myself I would become nothing like him. I would speak differently, live differently, raise my own children differently. And in some ways, I did. But in other ways, I carried him into every room without realizing it. I carried his stubbornness, his pride, his fear of being wrong, his belief that needing someone made you weak. I did not see that then. I only saw what he had failed to give me. When I left home, I did it with a kind of satisfaction. I packed quickly, said goodbye to my mother, shook my father's hand like he was a neighbor. He looked at me and said, "Work hard." That was it. No, "I'm proud of you." No, "Come home soon." Just work hard. I told myself I didn't care. That lie lasted years. I built a life. I married. I raised children. I worked long hours. I became dependable, serious, respected. People said I was steady. They did not know how much of that steadiness came from fear. Fear of failing, fear of needing help, fear of becoming small in anyone's eyes. My father and I spoke rarely, short calls, practical words, weather, repairs, health, money if necessary. If he asked about the children, I answered briefly. If I asked how he was, he said, "Fine." That word was our family language. Fine meant tired. Fine meant lonely. Fine meant don't ask again. My wife once told me I should call him more. I said, "Why? He never calls me?" She looked at me for a moment and said, "Someone has to be the first one to soften." I remember being irritated by that. Softening felt like giving him something he had never earned. That is how I thought back then. Everything had to be earned, even tenderness, especially tenderness. Years passed that way. My children grew. My father aged. My mother passed first, and after that he became quieter than ever. At her funeral, he stood beside the grave with both hands folded in front of him. He did not cry. I watched him closely, waiting for something human to break through. Nothing did. I judged him for that. Now I wonder if he simply did not know how to grieve where people could see him. After my mother died, neighbors began calling me when something went wrong. A pipe leaking, a light fixture broken, mail piling up. I would drive over, fix what needed fixing, and leave before the visit could turn into something deeper. He never asked me to stay. I never offered. That became our arrangement. Two men moving around the same wound without naming it. There were moments when I almost spoke. Once, I found an old photograph in his hallway, me as a boy sitting on the steps with a toy truck in my lap. He had kept it framed all those years. I stood there looking at it, surprised by the tenderness of that small act. He came up behind me and said, "Your mother liked that picture?" I wanted to ask, "Did you?" But I didn't. I nodded and put the frame back. Pride is strange. It can make a simple question feel impossible. Another time, he called me late in the evening. That was unusual. He said he had been thinking about my mother. I waited. He cleared his throat and said, "She always said you were a good boy." A good boy? Not a good man. Not my son. Not I love you. But still, it was something, and I missed it. I said, "She was kind." That was all I gave him. The call ended soon after. I think about that now more than I want to, because maybe that was him reaching as far as he knew how, and I stood there measuring the distance instead of meeting him halfway. The slow cost of not forgiving someone is that you think you are punishing them, but mostly you are keeping yourself tied to the same old pain. I did not understand that. I thought withholding forgiveness gave me dignity. I thought it protected the younger version of me who had needed more warmth than he received. Maybe it did, for a while. But after enough years, protection can become a locked door you forget how to open. My father's health declined in small steps. First, he stopped driving at night. Then he stopped going to the store alone. Then he stopped pretending he could manage the stairs without gripping the railing. I noticed all of it. I helped with what was practical: appointments, prescriptions, groceries, repairs. Practical help was safe. It let me feel decent without being vulnerable. The nurses liked me. Neighbors said I was a good son. I accepted those words, but they never sat right. Because I knew how little of myself I was actually giving. The last year of his life, he became softer. Not completely. He was still my father, but age had worn down some of the sharpness. His voice was lower, his silences less threatening. Sometimes he looked confused by his own frailty, as if his body had betrayed the rules he lived by. One afternoon, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with an old box of photographs. He said he was cleaning. He wasn't. He was remembering. There were pictures of my mother in summer dresses, pictures of me with missing teeth, pictures of old cars, old houses, people whose names I barely knew. He picked up one photo of himself as a young man. I had never seen it before. He looked almost gentle. That startled me. I said, "You look different there." He stared at the picture and said, "I was." Then he put it back in the box. That was another door opening. I did not walk through it. I changed the subject to his medication. I wish I could tell you I didn't know what I was doing. But part of me knew. Part of me always knew when a moment mattered. I just didn't want the discomfort of entering it. The final turning point came in the hospital. He had fallen at home. Nothing dramatic, they said, but his body was tired, too tired to recover fully. I visited in the evenings. The room was always too bright. Machines beeping softly, nurses moving with quiet efficiency. My father lying there smaller than he had any right to be. One night he looked at me and said, "I wasn't a very good father, was I?" I felt something in me freeze. There it was, the sentence I had waited decades to hear. And when it came, I did not know what to do with it. I could have said, "You hurt me." I could have said, "I needed more from you." I could have said, "But I know you were carrying things too." Instead, I said nothing, not because I wanted to be cruel, because I was overwhelmed by the weight of being right after all those years. He turned his face toward the window. A few minutes later, he said, "I didn't know how." Those 5 words have lived inside me ever since. I didn't know how. At the time, they felt too small, too late, too easy. Now they feel like the most honest thing he ever gave me. He died not long after. And suddenly, all the arguments I had kept prepared in my mind had nowhere to go. That is a terrible feeling, to spend a life waiting for someone to admit they failed you, and then realize that admission does not bring back a single year. It does not return the boy you were. It does not repair the dinners filled with silence. It does not give you the father you wanted, and it does not give him the son who might have sat beside him with mercy. After the funeral, I went to his house alone. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to feel angry one last time. But the house looked different without him in it. Smaller, harmless. His work boots were still by the back door. His coat still hung from the same hook. On the kitchen table was the box of photographs. I opened it. There were more pictures of me than I expected. School photos, birthday photos, a picture of me holding my first child, a newspaper clipping from when I got promoted at work. He had kept all of it. Quietly, badly maybe, but he had kept it. I sat there for a long time with my hand over those photographs, and I cried in a way I had not cried for him when he was alive, not only because he was gone, because I finally saw how incomplete my understanding had been. My father had failed me, that is true, but he had also been a man shaped by his own silence, his own father, his own fears, his own lack of language for love. Understanding that did not excuse everything, but it changed the weight of it. And I wish it had changed while he was still breathing. That is the part I live with. There are things you cannot fix after a person is gone. You can speak into the air. You can visit graves. You can hold old photographs and whisper words you should have said sooner. but the person cannot answer. That is the finality of it. If you are listening to this, I will not tell you to forgive everyone. I don't know your life. I don't know what was done to you. But I will say this. There is a difference between protecting yourself and carrying bitterness until it becomes part of your bones. I did not know the difference soon enough. I thought forgiveness meant saying the past did not matter. It doesn't. The past matters. What happened matters. But sometimes forgiveness is not a gift you give the other person. Sometimes it is simply the moment you stop letting the wound make every decision for you. I learned that late, too late to speak it to my father. Now I sit in my own quiet house with my own old hands looking at photographs I used to avoid. I see him differently now, not as the giant from my childhood, not as the cold man I spent years judging, just as a man, limited, frightened, proud, tired, a man who did not know how to love in a way I could recognize. And I was a son who did not know how to forgive until forgiveness no longer had anywhere to go. That is the truth. I live with it. Some days I can carry it gently. Other days it feels heavier than it should after all this time. But maybe this is what remains when people we love are gone. Not answers, not closure, just a quieter understanding of what we both failed to say.